Imagine this. You are not born out of love. You are not born by chance. You are born because the state has decided it. Your first breath is not a miracle. It is a cosmic duty. Welcome to the Tahuantinsuyu, not the empire of gold and legends sold to you in school textbooks, not the Cusco of postcards and tourists, but the pulsing heart of a social machine so perfect, so relentless, that it turned human life into a cog of the universe. Here, swords were not forged, destinies were woven. Forget everything you think you know about the Incas. Behind the roads embracing the Andes, behind the myth of the son of the sun, lies a more unsettling truth. Order can be more oppressive than chaos. In Sparta, they killed the weak. In the Tahuantinsuyu, they didn't kill them, they counted them. And that sometimes is worse. Because in the Andes, where the earth trembles and the sky can freeze you in a single night, disorder wasn't rebellion, it was death. Thus, the empire of the four parts wasn't built with blood, but with obedient silence, with quipu knots, with perfectly synchronized harvests. And at its center there was no tyrant, but a sacred principle, reciprocity. But beware, in the hands of the state, reciprocity becomes a golden cage. For us, birth is an intimate act, a gift of chance and desire. For the Incas, it was an act of state. Even before a child saw the light, their life already had a place in the fabric of the Ayllu, the ancestral community that was the soul of the Andean world. You weren't born to be free. You were born to fulfill your role. And that role began in the womb of a woman who was neither owner of her own body nor a slave. She was a guardian of balance. Andean women weren't locked away like in Athens. They ran, wove, planted, and sang. Yet every fiber of their being was oriented toward a purpose, to give birth to lives useful to the cosmic order. A weak birth wasn't merely a family tragedy, it was a tear in the fabric of the universe. There was no abandonment in icy crevices. Here, even children with disabilities were welcomed. It was believed they were touched by the Apu, the mountain spirits. But that didn't mean freedom. It meant that even difference had an assigned place. True control didn't come from the whip. It came from the normalization of duty. When a woman became pregnant, it wasn't just her family that celebrated. It was the curacha, the local chief, who sent messengers bearing offerings of coca and maize. Because that womb didn't belong to a couple. It belonged to the Ayllu, and by extension to the Inca, and the state counted every breath. The Inca's inspectors, the Tuquiriqui, those who see everything, traversed valleys and highlands with hawk-like eyes. They weren't searching for weapons, but for childless homes, unplanted fields, families failing to fulfill their mita, the labor tribute. An unmarried man, a childless woman weren't seen as free. They were gaps in the cosmic fabric, so the state intervened. Not with violence, but with decisions. In community ceremonies, elders assigned couples, not out of love, but for demographic balance and political loyalty. A young widow received a new husband, a brave warrior, a noble-born wife. The children of rebellious curachas were sent to Cusco to be re-educated. It was a form of love, cold, silent, efficient. Marriage, Kachunwami, the man and woman united, for wasn't private. It was a rite of social integration. Couples didn't pledge eternal fidelity, but constant reciprocity, to work together, raise children together, die together. And in that equation, the state always had the final word. But the genius of the Inca system wasn't control. It was the illusion of belonging. While Sparta molded warriors through terror, the Tahuantinsuyu built subjects through the dignity of duty. Working on the Incas' roads wasn't slavery, it was an honor. Weaving for the temple of the sun wasn't servitude, it was devotion. Even death had its place. The Incas didn't fear the afterlife. They believed the soul journeyed to Hananpacha or Ukupacha, depending on one's conduct. But for that journey to succeed, the body had to be buried with offerings, its name remembered. The state guaranteed funeral rites even for the humblest, because in the Tahuantinsuyu no one was invisible, as long as they fulfilled their role. But what about those who didn't fit? They weren't killed, they were relocated. The mitmac was the Inca's subtlest weapon, the forced resettlement of entire communities. Rebellious peoples were torn from their ancestral lands and replanted in distant regions, surrounded by loyal subjects. There, stripped of their local gods, their mountain ancestors, their language in the plazas, they were given new lands, new wives, new obligations. It wasn't explicit punishment, it was geographic re-education. And it worked, because the Andean soul is bound to the land. Change the land, and you change the soul. Thus, the Tahuantinsuyu expanded not only through war, but through silent absorption. It conquered memories, not just territories, but the finest gear in this machinery was childhood. Children weren't snatched away with screams, as in Sparta. They were allowed to grow in the warmth of home. But from an early age, they were taught that their bodies weren't theirs alone. They were instruments of balance. They played with clay dolls of the gods, learned medicinal herbs, ran barefoot along terraces, listened as elders told how Manco Capac emerged from Lake Titicaca with a golden staff to impose order upon chaos. And at puberty, the test arrived. For girls, Chikuchikui, the first menstruation, was a rite of passage. They were secluded in darkness and taught the secrets of weaving and chastity. If they demonstrated strength and purity, they could be chosen as Aklas, the chosen ones. The Aklas weren't slaves. They were priestesses, wives of the Inca, keepers of the sacred fire. They lived in Aklawasi, weaving for the gods and brewing ceremonial chicha. And when the Inca decreed, they were given in marriage to loyal warriors or allied curacas. It was an honor, but also a tool of political control. Each Akla given away was an invisible thread tying Cusco to the empire's farthest reaches. For boys, Huarachicui, the male initiation, transformed them into men. At 14 or 16, they faced trials of strength, running uphill, hurling spears, enduring the cold. If they succeeded, they received the unku, the adult tunic, and the right to marry, own land, and serve in the mita. But their lives were no longer theirs alone. From then on, they owed part of their time to the state, building roads, harvesting on the sun's lands, serving in the army. It wasn't slavery, it was reciprocity. And in that equation, there was no room for individualism. The Tahuantinsuyu needed no walls. It imprisoned with meaning. It told its people, your life has purpose, your labor feeds the sun, your child will continue the order, your death will be remembered. And in a world where nature could snatch everything away in an instant, that meaning was worth more than gold. But here lies the deepest paradox. The very system that protected against chaos also generated it in silence. Because to maintain order, the Inca had to erase foreign gods, burn rebellious quipus, impose a single language, a single history, a single god, Inti, the sun. Diversity wasn't celebrated, it was administered. Each conquered people kept their customs, as long as they didn't contradict Cusco. Their gods were adopted as lesser children of the sun. Their rituals were permitted, if they included offerings to the Inca. It was conditional tolerance, inclusion with invisible boundaries. And within this precarious balance, the Tahuantinsuyu reached its zenith. But the price was high. Because when strangers arrived from the sea, bearded men clad in iron armor, bearing a singular god who knew nothing of reciprocity, the empire didn't know how to respond. Not because its warriors were weak, but because its machinery of cosmic order had no protocol for absolute chaos. Smallpox had already decimated the population. The civil war between Huascar and Atahualpa had shattered the myth of divine unity, and the Mitmacuna, the relocated peoples far from being loyal, often allied with the invaders to reclaim their ancestral lands. The system collapsed not from outside, but from within, because it had built a perfect world, yet a fragile one. A world where every piece fit, but where there was no space for error, doubt, or creative rebellion. And in this, though by opposite paths, the Tahuantinsuyu and Sparta shared a common fate. Both mistook order for truth. But while Sparta forged weapons, the Tahuantinsuyu wove nets. And in those nets, every thread was a life. A life not abandoned in a crevice, but also never allowed to ask, what if I want to be something else? The boy who survived the Huarachicuy, the girl chosen as an Akla or married within her Elu, no longer belonged to themselves. They had crossed the threshold. Now, they were part of the rhythm. There was no individual glory in the Tahuantinsuyu, no solitary heroes, only fulfilled functions. And the most sacred function wasn't wielding a spear, it was sweating in silence. For the Incas, work wasn't punishment, it was an offering. Every drop of sweat falling onto the earth was a prayer to the sun. Every stone laid on the royal road was a promise of loyalty. Every kernel of maize stored in the kulkas, the state warehouses, was an act of faith in the future. The state didn't demand taxes in gold or silver. It demanded time. That was the mita, the labor tribute, a system as brilliant as it was relentless. Each family had to contribute part of its labor force to the Inca, to the sun, or to the community. 3 days a week for your family, 3 days for the state, 1 day to rest, if the gods allowed it. And no one complained. Not because they didn't suffer, they did, but because their suffering had meaning. From the cradle, they'd been taught that the Andean world was a fragile balance between the upper realm, Hanan Pacha, this world, Kai Pacha, and the underworld, Uku Pacha. Chaos lurked in every frost, every drought, every earthquake. Only collective order could keep it at bay. Thus the farmer carving terraces into dizzying slopes didn't ask, why me? He thought, my sweat feeds the Inca feeds the sun makes the maize grow. It was a sacred chain, and breaking it was sacrilege. But the genius of the system lay not only in ideology, it lay in logistics. The Tahuantinsuyu was the largest empire in the Americas before the arrival of Europeans. It stretched from southern Colombia to central Chile, encompassing deserts, jungles, mountains, and coasts. And without wheels, without horses, without alphabetic writing, it governed through an unprecedented network of information and redistribution. The chasqui, foot messengers, ran along the Capacñan, the royal roads, carrying quipus, orders, and news. They relayed every few kilometers, like a living torch that never went out. In less than a week, a command from Cusco reached Quito. The kulkas, state warehouses, rose in every valley at every mountain pass, filled with maize, dried potatoes, chuño, dried meat, charqui, textiles, and weapons. They weren't storehouses of wealth, but networks of collective security. In times of famine, the state opened the kulkas. No one starved, as long as the system functioned. It was an unspoken pact. You work for the state protects you from chaos. And for centuries it worked. But behind that efficiency lay a shadow. Because the Tahuantinsuyu wasn't a paradise of equality, it was a pyramid of carefully managed privileges. At the top, the Inca, son of the sun, demigod, owner of everything. Next, the Cusco nobility, the orejones, named for their elongated ears adorned with gold discs. Then, the curachas, local chiefs who retained power in exchange for absolute loyalty. And at the bottom, the people, the Hatun Runa, the common men, they were the ones who sweated on the terraces, built the roads, served in the army. But even among them, invisible hierarchies existed. Those from Cusco had more rights than those from Collasuyo. Those who spoke Quechua were more Inca than those who spoke Aymara, Puquina, or dozens of other languages. The state didn't impose culture through brute force. It imposed it through prestige. Speaking Quechua wasn't mandatory, but it was the language of power, commerce, and official rituals. Whoever wanted to rise learned Quechua. Whoever wanted their children to become mitimes or serve in Cusco adopted Inca customs. It was a soft, seductive, almost invisible assimilation, and amid all this was war, but not war as we understand it today. It wasn't an end in itself. It was an instrument of order. The Inca army didn't seek destruction. It sought incorporation. Before attacking, they sent emissaries with offers. Join the Tahuantinsuyu. You'll keep your lands, your gods, your leaders. You only need to accept the Inca as supreme, pay the mita, and use Quechua in official matters. If they accepted, they were welcomed with honors. If they resisted, they were crushed. And if they resisted too fiercely, the Mitmac came, forced resettlement. They were ripped from their sacred valleys and planted in distant lands, surrounded by loyal peoples. There, without their mountain ancestors, without their local rights, without their language in the plazas, they were given new lands, new wives, new obligations. It wasn't explicit punishment, it was geographic re-education. And it worked. Because the Andean soul is tied to the land, change the land and you change the soul. Yet even in the firmest loyalty, there were cracks. Because the Tahuantinsuyu wasn't a monolithic block. It was a mosaic of peoples forced to coexist under one banner. The Cañaris of Ecuador, the Collas of the highlands, the Chachapoyas of the northern jungle, all had their own gods, their own histories, their own ways of understanding the world. And though they accepted the Inca, they never forgot who they were. Resistance wasn't with weapons, it was with memory, it was with... They told stories in their native tongues, far from the ears of the Tucuiricui. They buried offerings to their local gods alongside those for the sun. They wove ancient symbols into the borders of official cloaks. It was a silent, everyday rebellion, woven into the fabric of daily life. And the state knew it. That's why inspectors roamed villages not just to count people, but to detect spiritual deviations. Were rites being held for gods other than the sun? Were forbidden languages used in ceremonies? Was the labor tribute being refused? Any of these was a fissure in the order, and in the Andes fissures become avalanches. But the deepest control wasn't external. It was internal. The Tahuantinsuyu achieved something few empires ever have. It made people want to obey, not out of fear of punishment, but out of fear of chaos. Because in a world where nature could snatch everything away in an instant, the state was the only barrier against the abyss. Thus the Hatun Runa didn't see the Inca as an oppressor. He saw him as a cosmic father, and his wife, the Koya, as a mother of the people. It was a theology of power. The Inca didn't rule by divine right, but by divine duty. His mission wasn't to enrich himself, but to maintain balance, and as long as he did, he deserved absolute loyalty. But what happened when the Inca failed? When drought came? When frost killed the crops? When plague took the children? Then faith cracked. Because if the Inca was the intermediary with the sun, why did the sun abandon him? That doubt was more dangerous than any army. And in the years before the Spanish arrived, those doubts multiplied. Smallpox, brought by early contact with Europeans, decimated the empire before a single conquistador set foot on solid ground. It killed the Inca Huayna Capac. It killed millions of Hatun Runa. And with the Inca's death came chaos. Because the Tahuantinsuyu had no clear succession system, legitimacy came from the sun. but the sun didn't speak. So Huayna Capac's sons, Huáscar and Atahualpa, faced off in a bloody civil war. And at that moment, the myth shattered. Because if the Inca was divine, how could he kill his own brother? The civil war wasn't just a political conflict, it was a spiritual crisis. The people saw that the gods of Cusco weren't invincible, that the cosmic order could fracture from within. And when Francisco Pizarro arrived with fewer than 200 men, he didn't find a united empire. He found a wounded body, divided, doubting itself. Many oppressed peoples, the Cañaris, the Chachapoyas, the Huancas, saw in the Spaniards not gods but allies against Cusco. They opened the roads for them. They gave them provisions. They showed them secret routes, because for them, the Spaniards weren't the end of the world. They were the end of the Inca's world. And here lies the Tahuantinsuyu's deepest irony. Its greatest strength was its greatest weakness. It had built a system so perfect, so dependent on the symbolic unity of the Inca, that when that symbol broke, everything collapsed. It didn't fall by the force of arms, it fell by the fragility of its myth. Because an empire sustained by faith crumbles when faith departs, and yet the system left indelible traces. Today in the Andes, millions still live in Ailes practicing Aini, mutual aid, Minca, communal labor, and Mita in modern forms. Quechua remains alive, the Andean worldview endures, but the Tahuantinsuyu, as a machine of cosmic order, is gone. And with it died the illusion that balance can be imposed from above without listening to the voices below. Because true balance isn't designed in Cusco. It emerges from dialogue between mountain and valley, past and present, individual and community. The Tahuantinsuyu forgot that, and in that forgetting, it sowed its own downfall. But the shadow of its sweat still lingers, in every terrace, every road, every kernel of maize growing on a mountainside. Because the empire no longer exists, but the people do, and in the end the people always outlive the state. The empire didn't fall in a single day, it fell in silence, in the whisper of a burned quipu, in the muffled cry of a betrayed curacha, in the lost gaze of a hatun runa who no longer knew which god to pray to. When the Spaniards arrived, they didn't tear down a wall. They pushed open a door that was already ajar. Because the Tahuantinsuyu wasn't destroyed from the outside, it unraveled from within. Smallpox had arrived before the swords, invisible, silent, relentless. It killed the Inca Huayna Capac. It killed his potential heirs. It killed the priests, the Quipucamayocs, the weavers of memory. And with them, something more than lives was lost, certainty was lost. Because in a world where order depended on the will of the sun, how could one explain that the sun would allow an invisible evil to decimate his chosen ones? Faith shattered. And when faith shatters, power trembles. The civil war between Huáscar and Atahualpa wasn't merely a struggle for the throne, it was the collapse of the myth. For centuries, the people had believed the Inca was the son of the sun, that his blood was divine, that his word was cosmic law. But now 2 brothers killed each other for power. One imprisoned the other had him strangled. Where was harmony? Where was balance? The people looked toward Cusco and saw not a sacred center, but a nest of serpents. And into that void of meaning stepped the Spaniards, not as gods, as is sometimes claimed, but as opportunity. For the Cañaris of the north, oppressed for decades by Micmac resettlements and tributes, Pizarro was an ally. For the Chachapoyas, whose fortresses had been seized by force, the bearded men were vengeance. For the Huancas of the Central Highlands, weary of sending their harvests to Cusco, the foreigners were liberation. The Tahuantinsuyu didn't fall because its warriors were weak. It fell because it no longer had a united people. It had woven a net so vast, so taut, that a single broken thread caused it to collapse. And the Spaniards didn't break it. They merely pulled the rope. But the true tragedy wasn't the conquest, it was what came after. Because the invaders didn't understand the soul of the Tahuantinsuyu. They saw roads and used them to transport gold. They saw kulkas and looted them. They saw islas and turned them into encomiendas. They mistook reciprocity for submission. They mistook discipline for passivity. They mistook silence for absence of thought. And so they imposed a new order, not cosmic but extractive, where the Tahuantinsuyu redistributed, the Spaniards accumulated, where the Inca protected, the encomenderos exploited, where sweat had been an offering, it now became slavery. The Andean world didn't just lose its empire, it lost its sacred logic. But here lies the miracle. The people did not disappear. While chroniclers wrote that the Incas were tyrants, the Hatun Runa kept planting on the terraces. While friars burned quipus, grandmothers wove stories into cloaks. While Castilian was imposed, Quechua hid itself in lullabies. Resistance wasn't with weapons, it was with memory. And that memory survived. In the Ailis, in festivals where the sun and Christ share the altar. In rituals where Pachamama receives offerings alongside the Virgin. The Tahuantinsuyu died, but the Andean world did not, because the empire was a structure. The Andean world is a worldview, and worldviews aren't conquered, they transform. Today, 5 centuries later, the legacy of the Tahuantinsuyu remains alive and deeply ambiguous. On one hand, it was a system of inclusion unlike any other, food for all in times of crisis, roads that connected worlds, a language that unified peoples. On the other, it was a system of relentless control, cultural imposition, forced resettlement, the silencing of foreign gods. It was neither utopia nor dystopia. It was a human response to the fear of chaos. And in that, it is profoundly contemporary. Because today, in the 21st century, we keep building our own versions of the Tahuantinsuyu. Governments that promise order in exchange for freedom. Technologies that offer security in exchange for privacy. Educational systems that train for the market, not for the soul. We still believe balance can be imposed from above. That efficiency justifies homogenization. That the common good need not ask about the individual. But the story of the Tahuantinsuyu warns us. An order that doesn't listen to the voices from below is a sandcastle. Because true balance isn't designed in Cusco, it emerges from dialogue between mountain and valley, between past and present, between duty and desire. The Tahuantinsuyu forgot that the Ailu isn't just a productive unit, but a space of affection, diversity, and dissent. And in forgetting that, it sowed its own downfall. But in its fall, it left a seed. The seed of reciprocity. The idea that no one is alone, that your well-being depends on mine. That work isn't a commodity, but a relationship. That seed still lives. In communities practicing Aini. In young people learning Quechua. In farmers who sow with respect for Pachamama. The empire no longer exists, but its lesson does. Because history doesn't repeat itself, but rhythmically it insists. And today, facing climate crises, abyssal inequalities, and social fractures, the Andean world offers us not a solution, but a question. Do we want an order that imposes, or a balance that listens? The answer isn't found on the Inca's roads, it lies within us. Because in the end, we aren't cogs in a machine. We are seeds, and each seed silently decides whether to break through the earth or let itself be buried by fear. Do you believe that order justifies the loss of freedom? Or does true strength lie in diversity? If this journey into the soul of the Tahuantinsuyu made you reflect, give us a like and subscribe to Andes Legends. Each week we explore the hidden truths behind Andean myths, from the origins of sacred maize to the secrets of the quipus, from the Chachapoya warrior women to the dreams of Tupac Amaru. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next episode.